Hello, and welcome to Agents of Nonprofit. My name is Alexander Lapa, and I'm here to talk to everyday superheroes helping nonprofits using technology. Today, I'm joined by guest Laura Bibbo. Laura, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Alex. It's amazing to be here on this lovely Friday morning and the morning of your birthday. Happy birthday.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is. It is. On your LinkedIn title, you have like a long title. You got change leader, innovator, nonprofit strategist, mentor, constituent experience strategist, and PMP. And I know you have about 20 years of experience in the nonprofit world. So when somebody asks you, what do you do? How do you answer that question?
Oh, that's a great question. As you can tell, I don't like to just be one thing, Alex. I like to do a lot of different things, which for better or worse means I know a little about a lot. And so, that response has changed over the years. But I guess in general, I would respond saying, my goal is to support and coach organizations in exploring opportunities, leveraging technology that better enable them to deliver on the mission that they have. That can be through different types of services, different coaching, platform selection and analysis, business process reengineering, but really taking the experience that I've gained over the last 20 years working in the space and helping coach others and what I've learned. I'm a big proponent of lessons learned as I go. I really want to continue to grow and not stay stagnant, and I want to share that with others. So that's a little bit about what I do. But yeah, I want to do a lot of different things. I don't want to actually pigeon myself into one particular area.
So, full transparency, I've had the pleasure to work with Laura for the past 3 months, I think, on a
Yeah.
particular project. And I want to share that whenever Laura speaks, it's not just myself, but everyone else in the meeting listens. Laura, you have a tremendous amount of knowledge. So, every word you speak definitely has some kind of value to it. And I'm really happy to be able to experience that.
It's funny. It took me a while to recognize that I have a voice. I think I was sharing with you, even just coming on to speak today. I was like, do people want to listen? Do I have something to say? And I think I continue to recognize there's things I want to say. I have more opinions than I think I know. And I think, I try to speak with conviction. However, I think sometimes that can be taken as maybe inflexible. And so that's something I have to be sort of aware of and recognize, because ultimately my opinions are just that. And I really want to share them, but I want something to challenge. And I really enjoy working with teams, and I've enjoyed working with you, because while we agree a lot of the time, you have a different experiences. You have different perspectives that you're coming from. And I always love to hear them. I am not, I'm not a solution architect. I don't know certain things like that. I know enough to be dangerous, but I love to continue to learn. And so working with different teams, I'm always open to those challenges. Those are my favorite types of conversations, actually. And I just see them as moving us forward versus sort of a negative thing. So.
Well, I would correct you. I would say you know a lot, you know enough to be very dangerous. So there's a lot of material we're going to cover. I hope we can get through most of it today, because there's a lot we can talk about. But before we get too far into it, I'm curious to know how you got started to work with nonprofits.
Yeah, I will say I fell into it. And a lot of people, I started out in fundraising. A lot of people who I talked to in fundraising when I was, early on in my career also sort of fell into it. I think it wasn't something that I knew about kind of going through college. I was really geared up to go into that social service space. So still in the mindset of serving people and helping people. But ultimately, I fell into working with nonprofits and fundraising. And then I went through a transformation myself at the organization I was working with, and really identified a kind of a love for technology. And so balancing that ability to give back by working with people and driving them forward in technology, I've kind of been able to meld those as I've gone in my path. And the nonprofit piece, it's funny, shifting into technology, I always say projects are hard. And so the ability to be able to put that into perspective and to understand who we're serving by those projects kind of allows you to move forward. And so it's really, I've stayed in this space for my entire career. I've shifted my role for certain, but I really wanted to continue to be able to learn and grow and help nonprofits as I go.
I don't take any official numbers, but the general impression that I've had, at least interviewing the guests I've had on this podcast, is that most tend to kind of fall into the nonprofit space. There's only been a precious few that have worked their way from their very young age or very young career path to know explicitly that they wanted to work with nonprofits. I've noticed the far majority just kind of fall into it, and once they fall into it, they just don't want to ever leave. Not that there's like a pit that they can't get out of, but that they just enjoy being in that space. So.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly why that happens, but it's great to see that we have this commonality.
Yeah, for sure. And part of that I think is the giving back, right? There's always that if that motivates you, that giving back piece. It's hard to shift out of that space once you're in there because you see the value that they're bringing to the world. Really, they're helping people in a way that not many people get to. So that can be really inspiring.
Definitely. So a lot of those titles that I mentioned, I'm obviously familiar with: strategist and so forth, mentor. But there was two that caught my attention, and that was change leader and innovator. How would you describe yourself as a change leader and innovator?
Yeah, I mean, for me, being a change leader means coaching people to put people first. Coaching them to see and understand the weight, the impact that they're engaging with has on other humans, whether that be on a small scale or a larger scale, but really helping people see the value in change and change management. I think in the space, I've seen a shift over the years in how people see a project success. 10 years ago or whatever, you see budget, timeline, and scope. And I think that people really have started to recognize, and while you may have inherently recognized that, I think proactively making it a priority that really success was it adopted? Did who you built the technology for, have they started to use it? Did it serve the individuals that your organization is providing a service to in a positive and impactful way? So I think just helping others see the value in change is kind of helping be a change leader. The innovator piece, honestly, I think some of that's leading with curiosity. I think sometimes when you are exploring these opportunities, people can be resistant. And I think when you lead with curiosity, you come out with better technology in the end or better processes in the end. And not being afraid to sort of push and explore those needs paths and new way of doing things. And the key there is not just innovating to innovate, not just changing to change, but really understanding the why behind that. And the why comes back to the change management piece is what is our vision? What are our goals? What are we trying to achieve here? And how can we do that most effectively? So change leader and innovator, I'm not inventing something per se, but I think thinking beyond what is status quo and being open and curious and trying to find better and new ways of working.
Yeah, keeping in mind that whatever technology you use is a tool, and the vision is the most important thing. What are we really trying to achieve here in very basic wording? A lot of organizations, I think, get lost in, we need the latest shiny new toy, as opposed to why do we need the latest shiny new toy? What are we really trying to achieve here? And then decide, what works best for that particular purpose.
Exactly. Right. It's what is going to make you successful. What is the definition of our success? What are those expectations? Again, not just pivoting. If you continuously pivot to what is the new shiny object, are you ever really delivering on what you said you were delivering on? Or are you just getting caught up a little bit in the hype? And so understanding your organization and what is going to allow you to move forward is really the most important piece there. And what you're ready for. I think that's the other key piece around the change is when you have these new shiny things or trends are shifting and you're trying to stay on top of that. I think there's the tendency to want to change a lot of things and understanding that capacity that your organization has for changing is critical. Because if you kind of oversaturate with change, you're going to overwhelm your teams and not be as successful in the end.
Yeah, definitely. So I know you mostly as a strategist, and I'm curious to know when would nonprofits know that they need a strategist? Like, what step are they at in their plan of ideas or vision? maybe they don't even have a vision yet, but there's obviously at some point, there's a decision to say, we may need help here outside of our organization. And maybe the strategist is the right way. Maybe they don't know the word strategist just yet, but there's a gap of something. And then, what does that entry point look like for you?
I think you hit on it a little bit there. Is there's a gap, and so it's either there's a problem or a challenge that they're facing, and they may not have the expertise in house to kind of know the direction to go to mitigate that challenge. It could be a big event. We saw a bit of this with COVID, where a lot of organizations were reaching out because they had an impactful event in the world that was preventing them from really doing work the way that they had been working in the past. And so really seeking out either organizations or individuals to understand, how are other people doing this? Where are people finding success? And I think, unfortunately, sometimes it's just recognizing the need to seek elsewhere. And sometimes a lot of people may have done it in the past, right? So I think you'll typically see if someone has worked with an outside consultant in the past, or gotten support from or expertise externally and found it successful, they find that an easier leap or jump to seek someone out. So yeah, typically it surrounds, unfortunately, by an event. There's a little bit less on the proactive side, but yeah, it's exciting. It can present some challenges when it's due to an event like that, because there's a need for urgency sometimes with that. So the earlier that you can recognize that a change might be needed, just kind of gives you a longer period to really weigh the options in front of you.
And is a strategist best, is the benefit of using a strategist most seen at the beginning of a project, in the middle, at the end, or throughout the entire project, end to end?
It probably depends on the strategist. I think most people will say I like most things early on. And part of that is influence, right? Can we influence the trajectory? Can we mitigate some of the surprises? It's easier to come in and plan early on, versus usually if you're brought in the middle, it's because there is an issue. And so maybe it's a specific challenge that you're trying to meet. But yeah, if you can come in early, it's definitely a better scenario. Again, from that perspective, or at least from my perspective, utilizing someone like me, but so many other, different types of people and experiences that they bring, just allows you as an organization to have fewer surprises, more knowledge around the gotchas and how other people or organizations chose to mitigate. And so I think the earlier on you can get that perspective in, the better off you are.
Actually, that's one of the key elements of a strategist is being able to say, look, here's how, this was same issue was solved in this other organization. It gives the current nonprofit much more reassurance to know that this is not the first time a problem like this existed. And here are how other people and other organizations solve that problem. That perspective, I think, is very, very valuable to a nonprofit.
Yeah, especially because we all know in our daily lives, even we can suffer from analysis paralysis. You have this problem, you haven't faced it in the past, and you don't know how to move forward. And so you can continue to run scenarios and things like that. But it is helpful sometimes to seek outside advice on how it's been managed in the past and what were the results and what are the considerations. Again, just from potentially that reassurance or confidence piece, you may have thought about all of these things, but seeing that it has worked and having sort of, I don't know, you're a data guy, having the data to really prove the value or the approach can alleviate some of that anxiety around having to make that choice.
And generally the problems that a nonprofit would have is not necessarily a brand new original problem. It's most likely been seen and been done before. And just exposing them to the possible ideas of how it was solved other places can help.
Yep, and that's the key is when you work with a strategist, they're going to bring that expertise of how they've seen it done in the past. But that's where really you as the individual who's been in and with that organization for a period of time and the other participants in that conversation really need to decide, are they going to work for your organization, right? So there's you're seeking outside expertise, but ultimately it needs to be vetted against your internal expertise around your organization and what you've seen work well and not work well in the past.
So, when working with a good strategist, what is an outcome that a nonprofit can expect?
Kind of a little bit back to what I said. Outcomes probably dependent on the why you're engaging with that strategist, but in general, fewer surprises, earlier gotchas, and ways to mitigate. I think a value that can't be underestimated when you kind of get those early gotchas is impartiality. Someone who's independent. I'm not a product vendor. I'm not an implementation partner in the current space. I know that space, but really I'm serving your organization. And so really that's who I have in mind, and that's really my purpose. And I think sometimes the other benefit or potential outcome is more focus and direction on the important things, because sometimes you can get really caught up in things that may or may not be important in the long run, but you may not know whether or not they are. So a good advisor can help guide that process.
And then we've already kind of alluded to this, but what are some of the warnings that you see that you need to repeat often? I know that you mentioned making sure you have a proper vision.
Yep.
Maybe there's some other warning signs or pitfalls that you generally find yourself repeating in various projects. What would they be?
Yeah. And I think, back to that vision one before I kind of maybe call out some others, is when I talk about vision, it has to be a shared vision and goals. And I think that's one of the key gotchas, is it can't be sort of developed in a silo. It needs to be developed and then vetted and kind of rolled out and get feedback and really make sure that as an organization, you're aligned and moving in the same direction. And so really sharing that vision and what you see as success long-term is critical. I think another kind of maybe area or thing to plan for and think about, we're talking about leveraging, outside resources, but don't forget about your internal resources. Their time is critical. And it can be really difficult if they're doing a lot of context switching and they're trying to, play multiple roles, meet the mission while also participating in a project or a program or things like that. And so the more that you can plan and budget for internal resources to have time to dedicate, I think ultimately you'll get more ownership in the long run, and you'll get a better product if that is kind of the goal or the project. I think another piece is recognizing and engaging impacted groups early on. And I would say think broad. Sometimes we may leave out whole stakeholder groups because we haven't been intentional about saying who is impacted by the change, who may have to make these decisions, what types of decisions are we going to need to make. So ones that I can think of, risk and compliance. Like, especially if you're doing a large digital transformation, that team's going to probably need to weigh in on policy, potential security and data policies, things like that. Finance is a key one. They're always kind of a consumer of the information you're gathering. And so just making sure that you're leveraging them in the right ways and you're involving them early so it's not a surprise. And they're also planning for their resources and their participation, planning for change and making it a focus. I think sometimes we have the best of intentions and we say, oh, it'll just happen organically. And these things can be challenging. And so if you count on things to happen organically, plan on them not happening. So really be focused and intentional about that. Another key is celebrating the wins. I think sometimes we can get so focused on just getting it done and getting over the finish line that we don't necessarily celebrate the wins through the process. And it can be a long and arduous process. So making sure that you are doing that with the team and it's not always just sort of on to the next deliverable or on to the next milestone. I guess I can go on and on, Alex, believe me.
Well, let's take a pause there for a second, because I'm curious to know, because you mentioned quite a few departments, teams, and so forth. Like, do you think it's important to talk to everybody to get all alignment everywhere? Or do some people just need to be informed? Like, at what point do you need to get input from these various teams versus just informing them that these changes are happening?
Organizational structure will dictate a bit of that, but you can't talk to everyone. We know that, especially if you're a large federated org. There's no way that you can, as a project team or a program, speak to everyone. But you have to have a solid communication so that you understand what level of communications each of these groups is getting and when, and you have intentionality around that. And so you're leveraging or building up what we hear quite often is your change champions or your general champions, and those are the individuals that are probably much more involved in the day-to-day project, but one of their key responsibilities is helping bring those communications to other individuals in the organization, obtaining that feedback and then bringing it back to the group. And so essentially you're creating a network to be able to get that feedback and ensure that you're planning and meeting the expectations or resetting expectations of particular groups or individuals that may not fully understand what you're trying to achieve.
So let's move into the CRM world, which of course is my lovely wheelhouse. I imagine, well, actually, I'm not imagining. Let's take it more neutral. Generally, when you work on various projects and nonprofits, do you tend to work with an organization that has a CRM or may not have a CRM? Like the idea is, from your experience, what aspect does a CRM play in a nonprofit?
Even the term CRM could be new to some nonprofits. And I think people have a different understandings of what it is. I think there's been a shift in this space. There was, a long time where you had point solutions. So you just had different solutions for the different aspects of, your quote unquote business, right? So your program team probably had a system or a solution that they used. Your fundraising team would have a system or solution that they used. Your finance team has theirs, so on and so forth. And so I think when you think about a CRM, that's where you start to think about the word, I like to use the word platform, because when you look to a CRM platform, for me, that means growth. It's not, you start to build an ecosystem. So it may not be one single solution, but you do have one sort of database of record where you're starting to bring together these different areas and different teams to start to leverage that information in a new way. I think when you think about a CRM and you start to bring your teams together and remove some of those maybe point solutions, one, you have teams that are working together that have never worked together. You're getting a picture of the people that you serve or the people that are engaging with you that you've never had before, potentially. And so I think that's where you start to get to the value of CRM. Some people call it a constituent relationship management system. That's the term I use most often. Customer is obviously used as well in the for-profit space. But it really is understanding the constituents that you're engaging with, whether that's a program participant, an event participant, a donor, a volunteer, et cetera. It's bringing together those pieces and understanding who it is that's engaging with you, what they're motivated by, and how you can serve them better, depending on their role.
It sounds like it's an essential part of a nonprofit. Like if you don't have a CRM, you really don't have an idea of what's happening within your constituents.
You have gaps in information, right? So you're trying to make sort of decisions with potentially more limited information. So it can reduce some of those efficiencies, because ultimately, in order to continue to move forward, all of your teams need the information that each of those teams have in some way, not all of it, right? But I think that's what CRM starts to bring together, is that bigger picture of that person. Whereas prior to, it's a lot of probably manual work where somebody's asking for information constantly from different teams because they don't have access to it. And so it starts to bring together that view of the individual. So that way you can decide, are you getting the ROI from some of the ways in which you're engaging with individuals? Do you even know who they are or what their preferences are? And being able to kind of leverage information that your different teams are collecting to drive that forward. So also you're not asking your constituencies the same things over and over, but you're maximizing your interactions with them and you're building those relationships.
You use the word CRM platform, which to me, like you said, it's able to be extensible. But wouldn't that automatically filter out various smaller CRMs that are really meant to be point and click, have very specific scopes and processes and workflows, versus ones on the larger side, which truly are platforms? They've evolved past a CRM and now have this huge ecosystem of apps and features and functionality. So when you use the word platform, do you intentionally try to remove the smaller ones, or is there other, like, what was the purpose or the goal of using the word platform?
Yeah, and it's not necessarily to remove the smaller ones, but I think the word platform is, I think, in my perspective, the future. It's where we need to go. And so I hope that smaller ones continue to exist. And there are definitely times in which they're the right solution for an organization. But for organizations who are truly looking to leverage the information that they're gathering to really start to work together as a cohesive organization and bringing in all of the different viewpoints that they have about these individuals and breaking down those silos across those teams, that's where I think platform really starts to mean something. But it is a big leap. And so I think that's where really coming back to understanding how your organization works, what is going to kind of move you forward in the right ways, and taking it in bite-sized chunks is the best approach. So yeah, I can't say that the smaller ones should go away. I think that the more that they can continue to extend themselves, the better. I'm all about having sort of market competition because I think that ultimately just serves our organizations in the long run. But yeah, there are limited what I would see as these larger platforms that have these integration points and can really help realize that sort of digital transformation vision.
And you might think it's a bit odd that myself as a Salesforce CRM guy are asking these kinds of questions, but I'm humble enough to know that, Salesforce, for example, isn't always the right CRM, that maybe a CRM itself, I challenge myself whether maybe some nonprofits don't need a CRM at all. Like,
Yep.
just because I do it doesn't mean that it's the right fit for everybody. So that's why I kind of challenge myself and ask these kinds of questions.
Yeah. And I think that's been my most favorite part about either working within an organization that was what I'll call solution agnostic, or, sort of being independent in the way that I am now, is the autonomy or the ability to make the right recommendation to the organization about what's best for them. I think CRM's the long-term sort of goal, but not everyone can realize that. It might not be the right fit either for where you are in your journey right now, or even potentially long-term. And so I think it's recognizing that. And I guess a little bit back to your comment about the shiny object, CRM can be a shiny object. It may not be the right choice. And some of that could be because fundamentally there's business processes or operational things that, you'd be better served adjusting first. So yeah, so I think it's good to always challenge that assumption. And I think that's where, again, back to kind of earlier in the conversation that we were chatting about, I may come off very, with convictions about what I think, but I want people to push back and say, well, why? Why are we making this choice? Is it the right choice for us?
Yeah, I totally agree. But it also sounds like you don't have any particular, you might have some favorites, but in technology, not just CRM, but technologies in general,
Mm-hmm.
do you normally give guidance on, like, based on what you guys are telling me, what your girls are telling me, I recommend this platform, whether it's a mailer or a CRM or whatever other system you need. Do you have favorites based on what you're hearing from? Or do you say, look, here are a few options and put the onus on the organization to make the actual end choice?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely that level of discovery first and understanding what they're trying to achieve, what their goals are, and really what they have the bandwidth, both budget and sort of resource available. Typically, I would provide more of these are the options I'm seeing in this space. These are the ones I see most often for an organization of your size or with your goals. And here are the gaps in those solutions where you might need to leverage another third party. And so I help guide with here's what I'm seeing, here's what I've seen work well, but let's assess further, because I think it's always important to do due diligence and to make sure that you're buying into the decision that you're making and that you've got the data to back it up. And it's not just a feeling or, well, somebody said this was the right one. I think it's making sure that you feel confident and can go back to your stakeholders asking the why. You can confidently tell them why it's the right choice for your organization. And I can help guide those conversations, but ultimately, the organization needs to make the decision. And I like it built on data. So part of that is that discovery. So that way you can weigh those choices against those priorities and the areas that are kind of most important to that organization as a whole.
Yeah, what I love about data-driven decisions is that it's very unemotional. It's very agnostic.
Yes.
You just, here's the data, here's what it's telling us. I mean, obviously there's a certain level of perception about it, but it's not based on it removes the feeling part of it, and gives you more accurate, more precise data, results, I should say.
Yes, agreed.
So in a CRM, then, this is a topic that I once heard you say there are certain things you should track and certain things you shouldn't track in a CRM, because obviously we're talking about a platform now, not just a CRM. You could
Yeah.
probably track pretty much anything and everything. So
Yeah.
just sticking with high level guidelines, or what would you say are things? We'll start with the first question. Where are definitely things you should track, like absolutely need to track in a CRM?
Yeah, I mean, I think the need to track are the people. Who are you serving? Who are your constituents? Who are your donors? So, basic information about those individuals and the relationships they have. I think the key around, again, you want to build relationships with individuals. You want to understand who in your network, right? It's like you would do anything, even with LinkedIn, right? It kind of see it like that. You're starting to build that network so you can leverage that network to reach out and have those shared experiences with them. So constituent data, your engagement data. So whether that's programmatic data of your choice, right? Because programs are very varied in the nonprofit space. Your fundraising data for sure. So, donations you're receiving, potential donations, right? Your pipeline management. It's a way to track kind of those processes. Again, comes back to sort of what are the different kind of aspects of your business. Take a step back though, as you're thinking about the data that you're collecting and even the data that you've been collecting all along, and be strategic about what data you're moving and what data you're continuing to collect. I think it's a big topic. There's a lot in society around privacy and security and the ability for me to be forgotten and for you to not track information about you that I don't want you to track. And so really defining what are those strategies as you're asking people to provide you with information. Do you need it? Is it intrusive? Are you just asking to ask? What are you going to do with that information? Is it going to provide value in the long term for that individual or your organization? So just kind of being more deliberate and intentional about data tracking. And even, like I said, back to the what data you're moving, I see it as an opportunity, like moving houses. You don't bring everything. As you open your closet, you go through and you decide what you've learned for the last, year or so, and anything else you throw away or you give away or you donate. So I think it's important to kind of be strategic about that and see it as an opportunity to say, I didn't even know we were tracking this. Is this something that is beneficial to us or not? And leave behind so you're not kind of gumming up your system with stuff that you don't need. From data that you shouldn't sort of be tracking, again, I think it's ultimately up to you, but I would encourage organizations to think about, is it better suited elsewhere? Is having it there allowing sort of that end-to-end business process take place? Or are you just tracking it there to track it there? I see quite often that we want to track a level of financial data sometimes. I talked about tracking fundraising data, and I truly believe that from a fundraising perspective, tracking that in your CRM is important, but not necessarily, it shouldn't be your GL. You likely have a GL that's separate. And so don't try to replicate functionality that you have elsewhere in your CRM just because. So really, again, being deliberate and thoughtful about the data that you're tracking and what you're using it for.
Yeah, data is not very useful if you're not doing anything with it. If it's just, like you said, recorded for the sake of being recorded, then you're just filling up your CRM with polluting your CRM, signal to noise kind of thing.
Yep.
You want to be as much signal as possible and eliminate the noise. Maybe that's a bit more of a techie type of expression, but
yeah, and potentially you're putting barriers to individuals externally, right? Your volunteers or your donors, you're asking them for information that maybe they don't want to give you, and therefore they're not going to donate now, or they don't want to volunteer because they find it either intrusive or kind of are questioning why you need it. So I think just kind of remembering that you don't want to put barriers up for people to engage with you. And so really thinking critically about the types of data that you're asking for.
And then you started talking about it, the things not to track. So financial information, yeah, I totally agree. You once mentioned in a meeting too that certain events like golf events and galas are, I forget the exact word you used, but I definitely took a note of it saying, oh, I have to ask you more about this later, that it's a slippery slope or it's tricky or don't do it, or there was something to that effect. So what are things that you should not track in a CRM?
Yeah. So again, back to that financial piece, but then related to events, I think again, what are you looking to report on? And how are you using that to drive your business decisions? When it comes to events, there's a lot of different components to events. And so understanding, who you invited, who came, and did they donate, and what levels of donations did they give, for sure. I think that's totally valuable to show kind of ROI for that particular event and determine, did it cost you less than what you received? But I think sometimes people can then, once you start to track that type of thing, think that all things about their process should be tracked in a CRM. And I see events sometimes can really function as what I would see as a project, right? And there's components of managing a project or managing an event that are better tracked elsewhere. The tasks that you need to complete to get an event up and running. I would argue, I don't know that needs to be in CRM. But people might say, but for me, it makes sense and it works. I just find that those teams tend to work better in other solutions than in a CRM. So yeah, I think it just comes back to, does the business process make sense to track here? And is the data critical?
So what else besides, or anything else besides finance events that you should not track in a CRM? Basically, just so, broad strokes, best practices. Obviously you shouldn't track, maybe there's personal information you shouldn't track.
Yeah. Or... I think, again, back to what are you tracking and why, right, and who's seeing it. I think some of that health information or personal identifying information, again, just comes back to, is it critical for you to have there? And then again, putting the right security and structures in place so that it's only visible to those who need to see it and should be accessing it.
Another quote that I captured was that you once said, if you want to get your users onto a CRM, get your major gift officers on that CRM. What did you mean by that?
Great question. So this was an instance for me, sort of lesson learned, or an area that I was probably arguing against at the time. But after having done this, we were asked, we're implementing a CRM solution, and they sort of wanted to prove value early on. And I think that's really key is, a large endeavor like this can be challenging to get buy-in. And so if you can have a pilot or get an early adopting group in there, I think it is able to start to tell that story and show that value in a more tangible way than sort of sometimes the theories or the ROI that we're expecting, right? And so the major gift team, I think they're, I'll say, an easier team to segment. They can operate sort of a little bit more independently. So from I have a project management background, from a project management perspective, you can carve them out without impacting other business processes too deeply. So I think there's a lower level of risk in some ways for including them as a pilot group. I think also most CRMs that are kind of in the market right now function really well for that team. And so again, showing the value to them really, again, just sort of tells that story. Also, they're not typically primary, what you would call a super user. They're not, their goal is not to be in a system. If they're constantly having to be in a system or needing to be, they're probably not getting you the results that you're looking for, because their ultimate goal is to build those long-term relationships, and you really want them to be able to do that. And so they're a good group to show both to program staff and other groups that you're having them collect data. They're using a system, but they're using it to support their job in the way that they need it supported. And it's not taking away from them being able to build those relationships and drive, their goals forward. Again, I think they're a great pilot group to start to show value in a more tangible way. And when I say lower level of risk, when you think about pilot groups, you can think about them in so many different segments. And so it's really kind of defining what might be the best segment for your organization, but they don't have it's not going to impact your constituents in a negative way if your pilot doesn't go as well as expected. And in the case that I was doing, it was a fundraising implementation. We did a pilot with the major gift officers. And I think what we found was super helpful was they went first, and they were using their CRM for 6 to 8 months prior to us launching it for the remainder of their fundraising teams across different affiliates. And their feedback and their participation really drove the design early on. They were testing constantly, right? And that's the hardest piece around these implementations, is getting that user testing and having it feel real life. And so we were able to drive that sort of real life experience, take that feedback and make it more positive and have a better result for those group when we launched it to all teams. And so having them in the room and just being able to speak to where it was when they started and where they're seeing it now for sort of this, sort of iteration 2.0 launched was pretty incredible. And being able to show that we took their feedback and were able to apply it, again, I think just drives that messaging forward of, it's not all or nothing at launch. When you're looking at a CRM, the goal of a CRM is to continue to learn and grow your technology alongside you and be able to take feedback and enhance it. And that's really where your platform comes in, where it has that flexibility inherently built in. And so you're not buying sort of this point solution that does its thing really well, but doesn't offer that flexibility. And so it just sort of proves some of those same points that you're trying to explain when you're driving that goal of why CRM is important.
Okay, taking a step back then from CRM, looking at general trends and stuff about the future, I'm curious to know your perspective of how you've seen, or what trends have you noticed working with nonprofits for the last 20 years? Where have things come from? Where do you think things are going?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's funny, I've talked trends in a lot of different ways. And I think one of the key trends that I've seen, I'll call out in the last couple of years, because it was, I've been doing CRM for 10 years, and I think nobody really knew what it was, and people were hesitant to dip their toes in. There's been a lot of technology changes, and so one of the things that I think sort of flipped things a bit and expectations is COVID. And I had a lot of organizations who really weren't able to adapt and pivot as quickly as they needed to because they were hampered by their technology. And so I think COVID has shifted how organizations are thinking about their technology and investing in their infrastructure and operations, because they had to make the pivot to a virtual world in a lot of ways. And so, organizations traditionally in the nonprofit space, they're measured on how much money goes back to their mission. And so a lot of organizations were really hesitant to invest significantly in the technology or operations space. And so I think there's been a deeper realization of the need, because they saw the real sort of impact that they had, because they weren't able to sort of leverage sort of tools that people were trying to deploy quickly to be able to support nonprofits in that way. So that's been super interesting. I also think there's been a real shift in expectations around the consumer. And what I mean by that is, we all know as individuals who have bought anything that online and digital is now a lot more sort of comforting and easier, right? So we're all about, what can we do faster, easier? Amazon Prime, I don't know what I do.
Amazon, just completely
right.
Just blew everything out of the water.
Blew everything out of the water. And so the people that nonprofits are working with are consumers. And so our expectations of ease and ability to do things online and digitally has significantly shifted. And I think nonprofits are recognizing that they need to adapt to that now. And so modern payments and wallets and all of these things have come to fruition. But, if you can't meet your constituents' expectations, they're going to find an organization that can. I forget the total number in the US, and there's also a significant number in Canada, but there's so many nonprofits that exist. And so in order to stay relevant and in order to continue that support, organizations need to meet expectations of their constituent base. And so those have really changed over time. And I think now organizations are reflecting on that and shifting their approach to meet those needs.
And then on a personal note, where would you like to see yourself in a couple of years from now?
Happy? No. Still continuing to learn and provide value. I don't like to be bored. And I want to continuously challenge myself. And so I like that I get the opportunity to work with different organizations and learn alongside them and guide them. And so I just want to continue to provide value to organizations as I go. Yeah. It seems pretty simple. But
it is simple. That's what it should be about. You're right. It's about happiness, growth, fulfillment,
Yeah.
learning. There was an expression, I think, something about learning that I probably can't recall. But the idea is that you always want to keep on learning. You should never stop learning. No matter how old you are, there's always something new to learn about yourself or about the world or about nonprofits or about technology. Like, I guess
Yep.
maybe that's one reason why I chose non technologies as well, is that there's always something new and there's always
Yes.
something to learn and improve and digest. So awesome.
Hmm. Yeah.
But listen, this has been great. Where can people find more about you online?
LinkedIn is probably the place to find me. So Laura Bibbo on LinkedIn. But yeah, or I've written some different blog posts and things like that. So definitely check those out.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Alex. I appreciate your time today and excited to continue our work together as we continue to grow and learn from one another.
Definitely. All right, folks, that's it for today. I'm Alexander Lapa, and I hope you join me again next time for Agents of Nonprofit.